What is going on, and welcome into another episode of Beyond the Tape, a live edition of Beyond the Tape here on the 32 Beat Writers YouTube channel. TJ Wengert here with you, as of course gotta rock the Team USA. This is a Mike Ruzioni jersey. You can't really fully see it, but an old number 21 from way back when, the 1980s. Gold Olympic medal team. The U.S. coming home with their first hockey Olympic medal, or gold medal, I should say, in 46 years. So definitely coming off a good weekend from that perspective. Apologies to, we actually have about 5% of our listeners who are from Canada. So sorry to rub it in to our Canadian viewers, listeners, whatnot. But I had to come in feeling good, coming in on a high after the gold medal finish yesterday. So going to be breaking down with that good mojo, breaking down the 2026 offensive players today. Tomorrow, we're going to be going live once again. I'm going to be breaking down the defensive side of the football. So wanted to do a little bit more of these going live and testing out everything here on the channel and just see what kind of the audience is. And I just want to say hello. What's going on, Jamie? So definitely jump into the YouTube live chat and let's have some conversations. Let's have some fun here. My idea behind, we're going to go live every day this week. My idea is offensive breakdown today, defensive preview tomorrow, Wednesday, a live 2-round mock draft. That feels like a lot of fun for all of us to kind of jump in and have some fun and just get in on the mock draft action. And then Thursday and Friday, we're going to be breaking down the first couple of days of the NFL scouting combine, and then doing the same thing Saturday and Sunday, I reckon. So going to be going live all 7 days this week. And really the ideal structure for this, as we're going to go ahead and let people kind of accumulate their way in here on YouTube. But my ideal structure for this is we'll talk 30, 45, maybe an hour. And then I want to be able to open it up to super chats and live chats. If you have a thought, comment, concern, prediction for the scouting combine, send in a super chat. I will guarantee that I will answer and follow up your question if you do send in a super chat. And of course, today's the first day we're doing this, so I'm not expecting a whole lot of that. But if you want to be generous, support us here at 32, that would go a long way. I will take that time to answer those questions. And again, considering today is the first day of it, probably just go ahead and spend some time hanging out and answering some questions in the live chat. So again, today, offensive side of the ball. Tomorrow, defensive side of the ball. So let me hear from y'all. Who are some of the people that you're expecting to see with big performances here at the NFL Scouting Combine? Who are some guys that you think maybe have a lot to prove this upcoming week in Indy and anything of the sort? Or maybe some of the buzz that you're hearing, right? Like, yesterday on 32, we had the retweet about there's some interest between Kansas City and Travis Etienne. I think that's a fit that makes a ton of sense. So the other offseason buzz and intel that you're kind of hearing right now, I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of that. That's kind of what the second half of the show is for. It's a little bit more laid back, a little bit more free-flowing and open forum, if you will. But with all that said, as people now have had a couple minutes to be able to trickle on in, I'm going to go ahead and tweet this from my personal account as well. But let me hear some of those predictions. Drop them into the YouTube live chat. Who were some of the predictions? Guys, quarterbacks, running backs, receivers. Who do you think will blow up the combine this week? I'd love to hear everyone's kind of early predictions. And we're going to talk about some of the guys I'm interested in. I have a certain pick that we'll talk about today for best 40 time. He's not necessarily a super unique pick in that regard, but it is my prediction for that. So I'm curious to see what everyone says and picks there. Yes. Okay, perfect. While we're also kind of riffing here, any and all guest ideas, video ideas you guys have, I'd love to have it right now. Basically, the rest of this week and then into next week, specifically post-combine, I want to reach out to as many, analysts and guests as possible. This week's obviously tough. A lot of people are traveling. We were hoping to go to the combine this year, but would have turned into just me going, which would have just been tough business-wise to justify that expense. And it's just that much more that would have been on me. But let me hear those guests, especially next week. That's when I'm going to be reaching out to all these guests once they're coming back from Indy. Want to get on their calendars, because once you get through the scouting combine, you're down to like 7 weeks, 6-7 weeks, where it's like, okay, let's get all the draft content. Let's get all the guests we could possibly have. So John is definitely a good one that I appreciate Jamie shouting him out there. But yes, talking NFL scouting combine, would recommend myself. I appreciate that. I do that to plenty of other podcasts too. So hoping to get any and all, and really that's kind of the beauty of having guests on. The following size, of course, like peek behind the curtain, the bigger the following, that's obviously great, but sometimes it's just a different perspective, right? Like that's just interesting to have a fresh set of eyes and how they look at the draft, a different voice and how they're trying to vocalize their points and whatnot. So sometimes it's just nice to have a different perspective. And that's kind of like the most fun I have with bringing guests on and whatnot, like Mike Renner last year to then Dalton Wasserman. And then we followed it up with who was right after, I think Matt Miller from ESPN last year. So it was like 3 consecutive guests, but all 3 guys kind of brought something different to the table. And then we had Dane on a couple weeks later. So that to me is kind of fun. And I'm a geek for team building. I have a series that I'm hoping to get off the ground, kind of fixing the franchise, basically kind of taking that from NFL Stock Exchange. But I think there's a website now that I can officially go through free agency, tag decisions, the NFL, a mock draft sim within that same video. So I'm excited to do that because that's where my passion is. I'm just a geek for the thousands of doors you could potentially open going through the team building process. And that's kind of what I'm excited to. And that's, again, the exciting part about bringing on a guest is like, how do they see these different avenues for the Bills, the Jags, the Chiefs, the 49ers, et cetera, because they may see it differently than I do. So that's, again, the fun of all that. Also, let me know, what do we think about the facial hair? We're about 2 weeks in. I'd be curious to hear people's thoughts. Should I give up on it? It's 2 weeks too long, but basically it was with my fiance, I guess it was, about 2 weeks ago. She goes, I kind of like this. You should grow this out. So I've never really tried to do it because for those who don't know, my other job I do outside of this is play-by-play sports broadcasting. And a lot of times I'm on camera and I don't really like the facial hair, how I feel about it. But, a lot of my spring broadcasts, baseball, it's not always on camera hits. So I get a little bit more flexibility here in the springtime, but curious to hear everyone's thoughts. What do we think? I also have a bachelor trip and a wedding later this year. So it probably won't be long for this world, but nevertheless, wanted to give it a shot. But all right, we're about 6 minutes in. I guess I've delayed long enough. We are live breaking down. Just trying to tweet this out from the main account. This is where having a guest would be great. So if you have any guest ideas, like co-hosts, anybody who's young and up and coming in the business, that is something I'm kind of looking into, is trying to find a second voice for me to bounce off of as well. We are live breaking down the offensive names to know for the combine. Join the live chat here. All right. All that said and done, let's get into why you guys are actually here. Let's break down who I think are the players with the most to gain this year. And you'll have to give me a little bit of a break here. Doing some of these graphics on the fly is not necessarily my strength and my calling card, but nevertheless, let's go ahead and jump into it. Offensive scouting preview. Let's start with who should stand out. Then we'll jump into who has a lot to gain and keep your eyes on. This is kind of the easiest way I thought to break this up, because I could go player by player and tell you everything you need to know and the athletic tracking this and that. And that just feels a little too long form. I like doing long form videos, but I'm also not trying to hit you over the head with every single name that's attending the combine. That's a lot. So kind of just trying to get an idea of like who I think will steal the show. And then really to kind of keep your eyes on is basically another name where I think this guy's going to put up some big numbers and help their draft stock. And then the a lot to gain is probably the category where I had the most flexibility with what I was looking for. But going to go three names for each position group: QBs, running backs, receiver, tight end, offensive tackles, interior offensive line, and go ahead and give you some names to watch as a combine. Really, it starts today. From the podium stuff, the media sound bites. But Thursdays when you get into measurements, on-field testings for certain position groups, and then that will run through Sunday. So that's where Thursday and Friday show will be breaking down the winners of those two given days. Same thing with Saturday and Sunday. But here is who I think should stand out. We'll start with Taylor Green. This one's an easy one. I'm not really going off of a too big of a different path here, if you will. Taylor Green's going to be a name you see a lot of for combine winners, and we got to see him at the Senior Bowl, and I mean he looks every bit of 6'6", 229, man, and he's got a big arm too. Like the big highlight throw at the Mobile was the deep bomb to Malachi Fields. It was a little off target, to be honest with you, and Malachi Fields does a great job ball tracking and make it look like a meant to play that way. But really, that was more of a Fields highlight than Taylor Green. But nevertheless, throwing on air, I go back to Anthony Richardson a few years ago, and I'm not saying Taylor Green's going to go top 4 in the draft or anything along those lines, but he's one of these guys where like 6'6", 229, people call the combine the underwear Olympics. Well, that's an athletic specimen waiting to be marveled at, and then throwing against air, just like Richardson, like when he lets those last 2 deep balls go and just lets it rip, chucks it as far as he can, there's going to be some people say, ooh, oh, whoa, especially people who haven't seen it in person, because that was one thing with the Senior Bowl where you see all the inaccuracy in the battles he's having with the footwork and the mechanics, and there's still a lot of work to be done there. But still, when it looks good and he lets it rip over 15 yards over the middle of the field, and you're like, ooh, holy cow, that ball's got some life to it, man. It's a fastball if I've ever seen one. Or when he just uncorks one deep and you're like, sheesh, didn't even look like he tried that hard. So you're going to have some of that, right? And throwing against air is a great showcase for some of that. So you're going to see the inaccuracies, but you're going to see a lot of raw arm talent to go with 6'6", 229. And if he runs in the 40, and that's the other thing here, I do want to put that as a caveat. Hard to predict which one of these guys is going to do the athletic testing, who's going to opt out of what drill. So I'm accounting some of that into this equation, but I will hit on some of the other names as we go along with, hey, this guy should crush the testing, but he's RB, like Jeremiah Love, we'll talk about running backs. He's RB1, he's clear-cut RB1, and he looks like a sick athlete on tape, so I don't know how much he really gains by actually testing. So I can see a world where he just shows up, height, weight, does the interviews, and that's it. So trying to account for who's going to do what and whatnot, but it's a tough one to predict. But Taylor Green should be a guy who does all the athletic testing in the world because it would be top-notch. And now, granted, you see that on tape, and that's part of why you draft him. But nevertheless, just like Anthony Richardson, running a 4.4, it's nice to just go ahead and have an official number next to it, even though you expected him to run a 4.4. So I think Taylor Green's going to do a whole lot of the testing, and he will put up some absolutely gaudy numbers, plus just the size, the frame, all of that kind of goes together to be a really interesting guy and a guy who should be a combine winner just from an athletic, pure specimen standpoint. And then that takes us to Ty Simpson, who has a lot to gain. It's a guy where he attacks the middle of the field. He throws with nice touch. He knows how to layer the ball over the defenders over the middle of the field. So again, throwing off of air where you have some of those timing anticipation throws, you're throwing to the sideline, those out routes, some of that stuff against air looks really, really nice. And the arm is kind of where I almost didn't put him in this, where like, I'm up two minds, right? Like Nussmeier going back to the Senior Bowl looked healthier. The arm looked better the ball looked better coming out of his arm. And I think some of that's going to be true for Ty Simpson. I've talked to some people, and basically he had 3 injuries over the course of the season. And that's like really not ideal for someone who's got 1 year of starting experience and they got hurt 3 times in that window. You don't love to see that. But that being said, is he healthier now? Because the ball might look that much more live. But he's also one of these guys where the arm in and of itself to begin with, like week 1 against Florida State, when he's at 100%, it's still not like the calling card for why you draft Ty Simpson. So I thought about not having him on here, but honestly, the ability to layer throws and just showcase touch is something you could do against air. So I do think that's going to be put on display. And if the arm if he looks healthier, I think the arm will look better against people's expectations. Not that it's going to be Taylor Green or anything like that, where it's just like, holy cow, this guy plants his back foot, lets it rip, and it's holy shit. I've never seen anything like that. That's not Ty Simpson, not by any stretch. But that being said, his ability to kind of throw those little layered passes, throw with touch, throw with anticipation, accuracy really was a big thing for him, especially the first 8 weeks of the season. I would say he was a very accurate passer. Then eventually down the stretch, I think teams started to figure him out a little bit, and also just figured out Alabama and the fact that they're going to go as far as 15 can take them. They don't have a good run game, and they've got one pretty solid receiver, but they've kind of forced him into being the number one when he's really more of a complimentary type. So, I think teams, when they see him at Indy, are going to be like, okay, cool. Well, outside of that situation, he looks healthier. The ball looks more live. And you also have to take into account, I meant to say this with Taylor Green, top speed. I have, the tape I use and whatnot is connected through StatsBomb. So I'm able to get some tracking data and athletic numbers here. Taylor Green, top speed, 22.1 miles per hour. Pretty awesome for 6'6", 229. But Ty Simpson is a pretty spunky athlete in his own right, top speed of 20.8 miles per hour. So I could see a world where like Tyler Shuck ran a 4.63 last year, and that's 85th percentile. And that was with a big body. Now, granted, Tyler Shuck's 10-yard split wasn't anything to write home about. It's more so in that flying 20 portion of the 40, kind of like Daniel Jones, right? Like, not an explosive athlete, not first step, and holy cow, there he goes. Not Lamar Jackson, not Jaden Daniels in that regard. But like Daniel Jones, Tyler Shuck, these big lumbering athletes, once they get going, man, they can move. And, Ty Simpson's not nearly as big as those two guys, but I could totally see a world where, if Shuck ran a 4.63, I wouldn't take that out of the realm of possibility for Simpson, if not maybe a little bit better, because I do think he gets to his top speed faster than those two guys. And 20.8 miles per hour is pretty good top end speed. The other thing I want to talk about here, lots of gain. He's listed at 6'2", 209. I could see a world where it's more like 6'1", 200, 202. Maybe 205. I'm just curious to see what the official height and the official weight come in at. Granted, if he was 209 at Alabama, he's going to make sure he's over 200 pounds because that is a big threshold. Really, 205 is a big threshold. So he'll be at least probably 209. And this is going to be the height and weight that follows him around the rest of his career, no matter how long he plays in the league and how much his body changes. So I always find that funny here for the combine. So for a guy who's known as kind of a smaller, slightly built, I am kind of curious about the height weight component of this. On top of he is going to throw. He is the top ranked quarterback on my board, and I think on the consensus board for most people of the quarterbacks throwing. So I do think that's a showcase where he should look pretty good. And really the athletic testing is about more than just the 40, but it is the headline event that most people then spend their most time, kind of reflecting on and looking at who are the winners, who are the losers. And I do think Ty Simpson's going to run a pretty good 40. So if he decides to run it, he's more athletic than people want to give him credit for. So I think he's got a lot to gain, and he's got a lot of the traits, I think, to make good on an event like the NFL Combine. And then keep your eyes on Cole Payton. I mean, 6'2", 229, top end speed, tracked at 21.9 miles per hour. So pretty much the same ballpark as Taylor Green. And he's a guy that looked good at the Senior Bowl. I think impressed a lot of people. I don't think there was a clear, like, I mean, I thought Nussmeier was probably the best quarterback at the Senior Bowl, but like there wasn't a guy that like changed the complexion of everything you've ever known about this prospect. Holy cow, draft this guy way earlier because. But Cole Payton, I think, did stand out as the guy that, okay, if we're going to draft and stash someone, Taylor Green, there's a little bit of something there, but Payton would probably be the top guy on that list of like, let's see where this guy is in 3 years because he does have a big arm. He is super mobile. And day over day at the Senior Bowl, the processing and the ability to make the reads and just the urgency he was playing with got faster and faster. So all that said, Cole Payton is kind of already working his trajectory up. It's just more so like, is he a late third round pick? Is he a fourth round guy? Like, where do you take this dude? And like I said, he's a good athlete. You saw it a little bit at the Senior Bowl. You don't get the chance to like tuck and run, and they avoid quarterbacks being hit at all costs. So it's not like the perfect showcase for QB athleticism, but he's going to run a really good 40, and it'd probably be right around the neighborhood of Taylor Green. And at 6'2", 229, he's also got a huge arm. When they throw, especially those last two heaves where he chucks it down the field, he's going to have some oohs and ahs in the crowd. And I also thought at the Senior Bowl, the ball placement and the accuracy got better and better day over day. So I think that's an area where I think he's already working with a QB coach. Because his tape at NDSU, you see, and it's kind of tough with the box I have, but it's a pretty loopy release. Like the ball was dropping too low. The combine, I thought he did a better job of keeping that ball here and then getting it behind his head a lot quicker. So I think that sped up his release. And if we see more of that at the combine, that's going to be another signal to evaluators. Hey, this guy's already working with someone. He's taking the necessary strides. And that will be good kind of further confirmation for me to see that and feel better about it. So if he's tightening up that release, getting the ball out quicker, big arm, good athleticism, going to test well, I think this is a guy who, right there with Taylor Green, just from a tools perspective, this is an event kind of made for him to be able to blow it up. Getting to Jamie's question here, do I have any similar comparisons for Cole Payton? That's a good question. I don't really, to be honest with you, because 6'2", 229 is just such an interesting body type. Like situationally, there could be like some Malik Willis, and I had my QB rankings out last week, and I kind of said the same thing about Taylor Green, where it's just like ideal spot. Let's just stick this guy in Green Bay for 3 years, and let's just see where we go. I don't really have a great one for Cole Payton, just because, again, the body type, and then really only 1 year as a starter at NDSU. So I don't know. He's a tricky one. And frankly, I don't love the comp game. I only talk about comps if there's someone I'm really, really excited about. And then Jamie kind of following up here. Taysom Hill, I can see some of that, right? Like, and I've kind of mentioned that about like the 49ers, or excuse me, not the 49ers, the Denver Broncos. Like there's one of two ways you could get to this Taysom Hill equation to me. Eli Stowers, who we'll talk about later on when we get to tight ends, but he's 6'4", 225, so he doesn't really have the mass of Taysom Hill, but former quarterback playing tight end. Okay, cool. I can see where Eli Stowers is your Taysom Hill type. But Cole Payton's the other guy, because you go back 2 seasons ago, he was this red zone weapon, specifically as a runner, where he scored 13 rushing touchdowns, and he wasn't the team's starting quarterback. He was just kind of their like red zone goal line breaker, vulture, if you will. So that is interesting. And I do wonder if this is a guy that Sean Payton's looking at as like, oh, there he is. There's my next Taysom Hill. And actually with like, and Taysom played quarterback at BYU, but like from a quarterback tape standpoint, like accuracy, who would I want to take a shot on? I feel much more bullish about Cole Payton. Part of that is like the 1 year starting status versus like Taysom Hill, a couple years starting at BYU, and you never saw the accuracy take that next step forward. Payton, at least you can kind of play the what if game in your head of like, well, he had 1 year starting. What would it have looked like if he got another year at NDSU, or if he had transferred and spent another year playing elsewhere? You can kind of play that what if game. But yeah, no, Cole Payton, really interesting athlete, and I do wonder if he gets some of the Taysom Hill kind of comps situationally. And again, the question then would be, if you're especially in that spot where like Taysom Hill's kind of this offensive hybrid. Not a quarterback, not a tight end, not a right. He's just a little bit of everything. Where do you draft that player? Because again, like Cole Payton, I'm kind of looking at late third, early fourth as a quarterback. And as time goes on, you start to get a little bit more hype around each and every quarterback. Kyle Trask went top 64. I always kind of lean back on that. Kellen Mond went in the third round. Eventually the hype just gets to a point where these guys go a little bit higher than maybe they should. And I wonder if Cole Payton becomes, in that Kellen Mond territory, late 60s into the 70s. But are you doing that because you're drafting as a quarterback, or because you're Sean Payton and you're looking at an offensive weapon? The conversations around Cole Payton are fascinating, but he was a guy that I came around to pretty late in this process, like basically 2 weeks before the Senior Bowl. I finally watched him, and I'm actually kind of impressed. And I can see where the hype is at, especially in a not great quarterback class. But let's leave that. Let's get on to the running backs now. Who should stand out? Originally, this was going to be Nick Singleton. Then he then breaks his leg at the Senior Bowl. So Nick Singleton's an easy one, where if he's here and he's participating, he has been known as a combine, an athlete freak, and that's the guy who's going to steal the show once we get to Indy. So really kind of unfortunate the timing of that, injury for him. But that being said, Damone Claiborne's another guy that I would not overlook by any stretch of the imagination. The thing that kind of is working against him is that he's 5'11", 195. So from like an RAS standpoint, yeah, not the world's greatest, RAS score collector. Like that's not really his where he's going to steal the show. But that being said, I do wonder just the pure 40 and the 10-yard split. And then I'd be curious to see if he does decide to run the 3 cone, because that's another area where I think his agility is elite. And those three buckets basically all should be like 90th percentile or better, to be honest. I think he's got great breakaway speed. I think he's an instant accelerator. And I think he's super twitchy lateral movement wise. So I think the day will probably end there. Like he'll do the 40, the 10-yard split will be great off of that. And then the 3 cone, maybe a couple other things, but I don't see him benching. Let's just say that, but I think the speed stuff is where it's going to really stand out. And now that being said, he's listed at 5'10", 195. If he comes in at 5'10", and he got up to 205, that's kind of the NFL like threshold, right? Like that was the conversation around Bucky Irving. Oh, he's sub 205, right? Rashard Smith last year. Oh, he's sub 205. So he's more of a sprinkle in the backfield, right? He's a flavor. What if Damone Claiborne comes in at even 202? Like 202 where you can kind of squint and get yourself to 205. Maybe that changes the rhetoric. I do think, at 5'10", he's not the smallest guy. He's taller than Jonah Coleman for that matter, who's 228, different body types, and God grows them different ways. But that being said, I do wonder if he can get that weight up and kind of change the rhetoric around him a little bit while keeping that explosiveness, big playability. So I think just if you're looking for the home run threat, Damone Claiborne's going to have the numbers that make you feel like, hey, that's the guy that we need to add that different dynamic to our backfield. And then who has a lot to gain? Jonah Coleman. He's been my RB2 this entire cycle. And look, I don't, going back to the top end speed, Damone Claiborne, 22.96 miles per hour top end speed. So one of the fastest players we talked about, actually, I think when looking at this, yeah, that's the second fastest miles per hour we'll talk about today. So the dude can fly. Jonah Coleman, on the other side of that coin, of the skill position guys we're going to talk about, outside of, I'm double checking. Yeah, outside of one of the tight ends. Yeah, no. So outside of 2 of the tight ends, he's got the slowest time. So you got 2 tight ends who are a little bit slower, and then there's Jonah Coleman. And again, I'm cherry picking these guys. I'm only talking about 3 guys each position group, just in case you're just joining us. So this is not the full exhaustive list. That's not to say Jonah Coleman's the 3rd worst athlete there. But of the guys we're talking about, miles per hour, top end at 19.98. But frankly, I'm comfortable with that. And this is really just kind of an opportunity to kind of have a rhetoric around this. And someone even asked about Kalen Black. I was really surprised to see him not get a combine invite, especially considering he was someone who looked really good at the Senior Bowl. He was definitely an omission and a snub to me. I like him. He's kind of a poor man's version of Jonah Coleman. So let me just talk about Kalen Black, and I'll come back to Jonah Coleman. Like Kalen Black to me, like especially after seeing him at the Senior Bowl, like really coordinated, like what he did in pass pro and as a pass catcher. I think he only had like 5 catches last year, 6 catches last year at Indiana. Hemby was more of the guy they asked to do that. But Black ended the season really strong. And at the Senior Bowl, I got to see, hey, this guy is capable of being a bigger pass catcher in an offense. It just wasn't what they asked him to do. So I like Kalen Black. I would still take him probably day 3. But if you like Jonah Coleman and then didn't get him, I can see a world where you're like, yeah, well, Kalen Black, that's the guy to fall back on. But I was really surprised to see him not get an invite to the combine. The good news is he's going to go to the Indiana Pro Day and he'll get to do all the team testing there. He'll be on his home turf, so he'll probably have inflated numbers. But getting to Jonah Coleman, this is actually a really nice comp here from Jamie. But yeah, Blake Corum, who, fun fact, was my RB1 that year. And, Corum, what's interesting about him, he was 208 when he declared, maybe even 205 if my memory holds. But he was this kind of smaller bowling ball type, contact balance for days. Not going to break off the 60-yarder, but like can get you 10, 15 per chunk and will make you miss in the phone booth. And to me, that's Jonah Coleman. 5'9", 228, bowling ball build, contact balance for days. But he's also light on his feet. And he's got the ability to bounce it outside. Now, Coleman at the next level, again, I don't foresee him breaking off anything more than like a 30-yard run. But I'm content with that. And that's kind of where, as much as I like Damone Claiborne, let me just double check my rankings real quick. He is my running back 4 at the moment. Not to give away too much of my running back rankings. That's the next ranking we're going to do. But he's 4, and it's him and Emmett Johnson, who another name to know. Emmett Johnson's definitely going to have a good combine. He's a really, quick twitched athlete, good explosive, a good 10-yard split. I kind of wondering where the 40 is going to be at. But Claiborne and Emmett Johnson, I'm not as in love with guys like that. I don't need the home run threat out of my running back. In this day and age where you're seeing teams play more too high, you're taking a safety out of the box and putting him over the top. Therefore, you're making it harder to break off a 60-yarder because there's one more DB who's playing back and has a better angle on you. So I think the day and age, I mean, you're still going to see them, but I'm just not going out of my way looking for that outlier, looking for that home run threat. I am much more in the line of like, give me a guy who's going to stay on pace. We're going to have a high success rate, has good vision, can fall forward, contact balance for days. And the other thing with Jonah Coleman is the pass catching side. Like, I think he's a really smooth, natural receiver. Nothing exceptional when it comes to like what he does as a route runner, but like soft hands and the ability to pass protect, that's a good foundation for me to work with on a, probably late second round, third round running back. So the big thing here is like, can the 40 be anywhere near acceptable? And like, I remember Caleb Johnson last year, kind of a similar weighted prospect, and it's like 4, 5, 6. And that was a little disappointing because there were some definitely breakaway runs for Caleb Johnson in Iowa where you're thinking he could be low 4, 5s. And it's really it's not fair, right? Like half of a tenth of a second can change so much of how we look at that of a prospect. If Caleb Johnson runs a 4.51, does he go before the third round? It'd be interesting to have that comparison. Or if he ran a 4.51, instead he ran a 4.46, like that half of a tenth is insane how much it changes our complexion here. So really that 4.56 is kind of the number to beat. If Jonah Coleman runs better than Caleb Johnson, yeah, I think he's going to go late second to early third. He'll be a top 75 player, I think, in this year's class. But if he's more of the 4.56 to 4.6, maybe we're talking about him being, post top 75, maybe even getting outside the top 100. But like the player, like the contact balance, way too much for him to fall that low for me. It's just like, where is that top end speed gear? But I think everything else is going to look pretty solid for him. And like I said, Jamie really like this comp. Blake Corum, I think he's a little bit bigger. He's actually a little right around the same height. He's 1 inch taller, but a little bit bigger. So I think this is kind of Blake Corum through and through. Coleman reminds me of Jalen Warren. I think that's a fair comp. I think Warren probably has a little bit. He's probably got a better top end gear. I think about his breakaway touchdown this last year against the Browns. Maybe it was 2 years ago now. I'm a Steelers fan. I should remember that. But he had that breakaway touchdown against the Browns where, he had the distance, he had the speed to go the distance. So yeah, I wonder if he's a little bit bigger of a Jalen Warren, but with, the other side of that counter being he's a little bit bigger, but he's probably a little bit slower on the same time. But I think Jalen Warren's an interesting kind of comparison as well. And then keep your eyes on Robert Henry from UTSA. And I know this is a running back not everyone's watched yet, but he was a stand at the shrine. 5'9", 205. So this is another one of those Blake Corum types. Holy cow, hold on. I like the low center of gravity. And he can play with good power, but also top end speed of 22.39. So ahead of Taylor Green, ahead of Cole Payton, and only a little bit behind Damone Claiborne while doing it 10 pounds heavier. And like literally, if if you don't have access to software, it's like no big deal. But his top end speed, that 22.39 figure, came against Texas A&M, one of the best defenses in the country. Yeah, so Robert Henry, definitely a name to know. I would highly encourage you go ahead and check out his tape, man. He is definitely an under the radar guy and probably a third, a day 3 guy because of that. But he's going to be the guy that this year, like Isaac Arendo a couple years ago, coming out of Louisville, where like RAS is a 9.9. Holy cow, who is this guy? He barely played at Louisville. And that's not necessarily the case here for Henry. He was definitely their bell cow guy. But I'm just saying that as a situational example where like Isaac Arendo kind of pops out of nowhere. Or like receiver-wise, Isaac Tesla was that dude last year where it's like, and Andrew Armstrong from Arkansas. Those 2 guys from Arkansas where it's like, holy cow, where'd this guy come from? Why is he a 9.9 athlete on the RAS score? Let me go check his tape. Robert Henry's going to be the guy where you see a lot of people talking about that because the weight checks the box. The 40-yard dash is going to be really good. Again, top end speed of 22.39 miles per hour. And he's an instant accelerator. It's always good to trust the guy with first 2 names. Yeah, absolutely. You can't go wrong. You can call him one or the other, basically. But no, he's also an instant accelerator. Like on that handoff against A&M, it's from the shotgun. He catches it, and he almost comes to a full stop right away, cuts up through the middle of the field, just sees a wide open hole right between the center and the right guard. Instant accelerator, and gone. Appreciate you, Zare Katsubadian, everyone, our lead fantasy analyst. Want to appreciate him. Say thank you to him for joining the show here. Appreciate him hitting up the live chat. If you need fantasy advice, Zare, I mean, he carried me to a fantasy championship in one of my leagues and was the only reason I was a top scorer in my absolute main league. Finished in 3rd place in that league. That one's a bummer, but that's on me. But I was the top scorer in that league, all because of Z's fantasy advice. So definitely want to shout out Zare Katsubadian while he's in here. But yeah, Robert Henry, I wanted to shout him out because I don't want to have some of these positions. It's like guys I've talked about a ton as top 50, top 75 guys. But I also wanted to shout out some guys who like maybe Robert Henry's not on everyone's radar, and he probably should be and probably will be after this upcoming week. All right, let's get on to wide receivers. Brendan Thompson, this is the top speed of anybody we'll talk about. He's 5'9", 170, 23.1 miles per hour. This is everyone's kind of pick for best 40 at the combine, and I'm going to be, a bum and just kind of ride those coattails. I'm with it. Brendan Thompson, not only the speed, but the acceleration, man. Like this guy's 10-yard split is going to be something to behold too. Now, granted, we're talking 5'9", we're talking 170, so like definitely a certain build of receiver where you would maybe think the speed is certainly a big plus to his game, without a doubt. But I will say, like, he's got better ball skills, and I think some people want to give him credit, both tracking it down the middle of the field, but also, like, he's a little more willing to go over the middle of the field, catch a slant, and watch that football in. So Brendan Thompson's an interesting guy. He's definitely not an X. You can't really be an X at 5'9", 170. But that being said, like, slot's interesting. Z, get him in motion and get him a head start. Really fun player. But he is my pick for top combine speed. And I think the 10-yard split's going to be one of the best that we see as well. So everything off of that will be interesting. That's why when I did this video, I just wanted to talk about who should stand out, who has a lot to gain. I didn't want to do like an RAS draft. Like I know Daft on Draft, those guys did that. And to me, it's like Brendan Thompson's not going to have the weight to be like an all-time RAS tester. But everything he does do, I think will, outside of height and weight, everything he will participate in will be exceptional, be one of the top at that respective position. And I think 3-cone should be another one where he would play. You know, his lateral agility is definitely explosive. And again, his ability to accelerate and decelerate both play. They're both awesome. And that's kind of what, not only the lateral agility, but the ability to stop, start, and then go from start to stop. That's another place where that is measured. So I think everything that Brendan Thompson does participate in, he's going to light it up. Who has a lot to gain? And Jordan Tyson's a little bit of a different thing here because, again, I don't know how much of the testing he's really going to do. Tyson's on this list because of the medicals, and we'll talk about a guy like that on the defensive side tomorrow once we go live. But this is one where it's just, okay, he's missed 48% of his college games. I believe the number's at between a shoulder, a knee, and a hamstring. So it's like, it's not even just one thing you can look at and point to and say, hey, where's that at? It's kind of his overall body. So where is he at with that? But when he's on the field, I have said this multiple times, and Mekhi Lemon's my receiver one, but that said, when he's on the field, Jordan Tyson has the best tape of anybody in this class. But often injured college players tend to be often injured in the NFL. So that's kind of my one reserve here with Jordan Tyson. So he's got a lot to prove and a lot to gain just from the medical side of this and the conversations, the interviews that he's going to be able to have with these teams. That being said, I don't know if the 40 is really going to be that great. To me, he's more impressive. Like Josh Jefferson ran a good 40, but like Jefferson's ability to go 0 to 100 and then 100 back down to 0 is why he's the best intermediate separator in the league. And I'm always jaw on the floor every time I see Jefferson run those comeback routes, run that, in breaking dagger. And Jordan Tyson's got a lot of that same stuff. And again, I don't think he'll have the 40 that JJ ran, but if it's somewhere near adequate, if it's Jaden Higgins 4.47, really even up to 4.5, I'm fine with that. 4.5 flat's kind of like where it'd probably teeter off to where we get some concerns maybe about the long end speed. But it's more of his route running ability, the suddenness, the ability to throttle down and decelerate. And then he cleaned up his hands a ton this year. So just looking for an adequate enough 40 if he even decides to run. Could see a world where he just says, I'm good on that, not going to even put it out in the universe. And if he doesn't run the 40, I would probably say he's probably not testing at all. Like that would be the one area, that the 10-yard split. The 3-cone could be interesting here. Again, very good separator, good lateral movement, lateral agility, I should say. But that being said, I'm not necessarily entirely sure he'll be incentivized to go and run anything other than the 40. So if he doesn't run the 40, I think this is just like an interview week for Jordan Tyson. I want to answer some questions here. Malachi Fields, definitely another name I wanted to talk about here, and I would put him in the kind of keep your eyes on. I think he'll run a better than a 4.5. The thing with Fields is the 10-yard split's not going to be sexy. It's the flying 20. It's the 20 through 40 portion of the 40 that's going to stand out for Malachi Fields. He's a little bit of a lumbering athlete off the line of scrimmage in like those first couple steps, but he's 6'4", and his strides eat up ground. So I think he'll be right around Jaden Higgins, 4.47, 4.48, and probably does make him a second-round lock because the tape's good. He's a kind of a Velcro receiver where like he lives with DBs being attached to him, but he's got vice grips for hands. He's got a big catch radius, and he's willing to make those contested grabs over the middle of the field. And then if he runs sub 4.5, he's going to change how people perceive that. Instead of this possession, Velcro, contested catch guy, he's also a field stretcher. He can get down the field for us. So I do think if he runs sub 4.5, that will lock him into the top 64 picks. I've been thinking about this for one of my next round of mocks. Maybe we'll do this Wednesday when we do a live 2-rounder. Jordan Tyson. Could he fall to Pittsburgh? I could see a world where he falls that far. Now, it's going to be a gamble for whoever takes him. But at 21, my risk appetite for I'm a Steelers fan here. My risk appetite would be there for this because we need receivers so badly. And the thing with Tyson is like, yeah, you already have DK Metcalf there, but Tyson could be an X. He could be a Z. And he also could be a power slot. Like there's a lot of different places you could line him up and get a lot of use out of him. So I'm totally here for the Jordan Tyson to Pittsburgh conversation. And then, yeah, this is kind of, Randy coming in here, kind of what I was thinking about. Yeah, like love the player. Best receiver in the class when he's out there. The question is, can he stay out there? So that's kind of my frustration point with Jordan Tyson, but I love the tape. And really all the top 3 receivers. I think there's a reason to be excited about them with like a little bit, like if you see the yin and yang, right, where it's like mostly white and then that little bit of black. That's kind of how I feel about Lemon, Tate, and Tyson, to be honest. And maybe Tyson's other side is a little bit bigger than Tate and Lemon. But that being said, there's a lot of exciting traits about all 3 of those guys. Would you consider Tyson injury prone like George Pickens? No. I'd have to think back to about Pickens and his injuries there at Georgia. But I don't think Pickens was as often injured as Tyson. Now, again, I'd have to go back and double check. It's been a few years now, so I'd have to like dive back into those sheets. But also, even if he was, if I remember right, it was all lower body. It was all leg related. Again, so it's been a few years. I had to go double check. But I also liked Pickens, top 50 talent on my board, second round guy. I thought the Steelers got him in a good spot. Had first round talent. It was just the off the field stuff and some of those injuries that you were kind of a little concerned about. But Tyson, I would say, is even more injury prone. And man, I have to think about a good receiver comp situationally for that. Another name to know, Bryce Lance. I'm with you here, Randy. 100%. This is kind of shades of Malachi Fields in the sense that straight line speed all day. This guy can run in a straight line fast as anybody in this class, really, especially when you consider he's 6'4". So yeah, Bryce Lance is gonna be another one of those guys where it's like Isaac Tesla, where he RAS wise, the height, the weight, they're up there, 90th percentile plus, and then he'll run a mid 4.4. Interesting. McConkey's an interesting comp there for Tyson, but I don't even know if McConkey missed 48% of his games. Yeah, and Pickens tore his ACL in college. That was that last year, but I'm pretty sure all of his injuries were all lower extremities, like that leg. See, with Tyson, it's like it's the shoulder, it's the hamstring, it's the knee. So like, but yeah, McConkey might be the interesting one. But the thing with McConkey, he's at 6 foot. Here, let me pull up his mock draftable just to be sure, so I'm not talking off the top. Lad McConkey came out in 2024. You're talking about 5'11" and 5'8", and then 186 pounds. Versus Jordan Tyson, who's 6'1", 6 foot, 200, 205, 210 pounds. So that's, you could say McConkey, but that's part of the concern that comes with drafting a sub 6 foot receiver. Oh, he might get banged up more. Tyson's like the body type that you should say, hey, he should play through this. Now, granted, I give full hats off to Steve Palazzolo and Sam Monson. They talk about this all the time with quarterbacks. We're like, just because a guy's a big, rugged quarterback doesn't actually mean that they're going to be more durable, i.e. Brock Osweiler, i.e. Carson Wentz. Sometimes it's just the way you play. And if you're a reckless play style, you're going to get hurt. And then we've seen some small quarterbacks who are extremely durable. Not always. Now, granted, the smaller quarterback pool is a lot less to pull from than the big quarterback pool. So it's a little bit of apples to oranges there, but interesting nonetheless. So I love these comments. I love everything that everyone's talking about here. Going back to Malachi Fields, Daniel Jeremiah had Fields at wide receiver 7. You're going to see a lot of people like Daniel Jeremiah who wide receiver and edge in the top 50, you could have 7 or 8 from each position. Like those are clear cut, the 2 position groups you want to be drafting this year, receiver and edge. Not only because the top end talent is pretty good, but the depth. Like the second round pool available to the Panthers, I always talk about this in my mocks, like the edge rushers available to you at 51, it's an outlier year from that standpoint. It is unreal. But we're talking offensive players to the ball today. Collarbone injury, yeah, baby. So that's kind of what I was talking about earlier on, where it's like it's the collarbone injury, not necessarily shoulder, but yeah, collarbone, knee, and hamstring. So, and then even the knee to the hamstring, that one's a ligament, one's a soft tissue injury. So that in and of itself is kind of interesting. Arch Cam, yeah. And I think you're kind of spot on there with Cam Newton. You compare him to Carson Wentz, just height, weight wise, pretty similar. But Wentz battled injuries, and of course, you tear an ACL year 2, things can definitely change. But like Newton was pretty durable until like the end, of his career. So really, it's about play style. And kind of getting back to Jordan Tyson, that's where it's frustrating. Is like this guy is such a good intermediate middle of the field route runner. Like he runs the cleanest dagger route of anybody in this class. But are you going to have faith and confidence to ask him to do that multiple times in a game? Give this guy 100 plus targets a year, with that being a big part of the route tree, when hey, he's one hit away from over the middle of the field and being out for 6 weeks or out for the season. That's kind of where I do wonder the risk appetite for Tyson. And I can see it going one way where it's like, like my last mock, I had him go high as Titans to the 4. As high as 4 to the Titans. Sorry, let me structure my sentences properly. And I could see a world where Dayball looks at him and is like, yeah, I'm not worried about the injury history. If he's healthy, he's a stud. But that's a pretty high place to take that risk appetite. Versus the Steelers at 21, if it doesn't work out, you miss out on a mid to late first rounder. That sucks. It's not ideal, but it's a lot more you can live with that a lot more than missing on the number 4 overall selection. And even sticking with the Titans, this is funny. Like comparing him to Corey Davis. Corey Davis, a guy that went number 5 overall from Western Kentucky. Am I making that up right? Yeah, Western Kentucky, I think. I think Tyson's a better prospect. Clear cut. Like if you're just talking Tyson at 4 or Corey Davis at 5, give me Jordan Tyson all day. But then the injury component is a big part of this. So, I am really curious. Obviously, a lot to gain here for Jordan Tyson. Getting back on track here. Keep your eyes on Denzel Boston. We also talked about Bryce Lance as a good candidate for that. Big, tall, fast receiver. And another guy, Bryce Lance, I think the gauntlet will be a good drill for him. And I kind of want to talk about the gauntlet when it comes to Boston. And then same thing with Fields, where I think the gauntlet could be a pretty solid time and one of the best. And I think he's going to run a really good 40. But Denzel Boston, his kind of bugaboo is like the top end speed. Don't really think he's going to be a guy that lights it up from that standpoint. But honestly, as long as it's mid 4.5s or better, which I don't even think it's going to be that bad. If I had to guess, I'd say it's 4.53. Maybe it's 4.55, but I'm content with that considering his play style. 6'4", 209, though, like at 6'4", his strides are eventually going to take over. And he could be very similar to kind of the Malachi Fields thing we just talked about a moment ago, where maybe the 10-yard split isn't great, but eventually he's going to start eating ground with those strides. So like 4.53 to me feels about right. But he's a really fluid mover in and out of his breaks, considering he is 209 pounds and he is 6'4". I think the hip fluidity is really something that kind of stands out for someone that big catch radius, unafraid to go attack the football. So even if he does run, let's just say a 4.57, let's just say he's a tick slower than Caleb Johnson in 2 different positions, but let's just say it's a 4.57 for Denzel Boston. I could then see him following it up with one of the best, maybe the best gauntlet time. Probably not the best, because you still have the guys of Zachariah Branch, Casey Concepcion, and a lot of other guys who are going to test really well in the gauntlet. But don't be surprised if Boston's the guy this year where we're talking about, okay, well, what matters more, the 40 or the gauntlet? And I tend to be in the gauntlet conversation because that to me is more simulated in actual football than like, you don't have pads on, ready, set, roll. Not a whole lot of times where in the NFL you get to just come set into a track position and then go run for 40 yards as fast as you can. Don't really see that a whole lot in the field. The gauntlet drill, to me, much more applicable to like what you actually do on the field. So I'm very curious to see that out with Denzel Boston. What else does he could participate in? He's a big body guy. Most of the time, these big receivers don't do the 3-cone because the change of direction, the hip fluidity isn't there. But he's got a little bit more of that than you would expect for 6'4", 209. So I do wonder if maybe he would be interested in doing that. Again, he'd probably be as big a receiver we've seen run that drill in a long time. But I'd be curious to see that standpoint and if he would be willing to do that. But big, tall, and then also like the other thing here I haven't really talked about yet is like the measurements, that arm length, hand size. These are things that like you're going to see those coming in on whatever day the receivers are. What, Saturday? I think it's Saturday. Might be Friday. I think Saturday though. All those measurements are going to come in and you're going to be like, oh my God, Denzel Boston, 90th percentile arm span, 90th percentile hand size. And I'm guessing here, but I'm willing to bet that he's going to have really appealing catch radius and then the hands are going to look really good too. So he's going to kind of steal the show from that standpoint as well. So those receivers, appreciate all those comments too. That was a great conversation kind of expanding on this, kind of group because receivers, and then when we talk corners tomorrow, like there's a lot of guys you could talk about because there's a lot of really good athletes. So keep shouting out names, keep them coming in the comments in the live feed. But in the meantime, let's go ahead and switch over to tight ends. Who should stand out? Kenyon Sadiq. This one's easy. Like if you watched any Kenyon Sadiq film, like the guy's a really good athlete, no doubt about it. That being said, I do think he's another one of these guys where once you see the on-field stuff too, like how he just generally moves and carries 245. Yeah, I think people are going to be excited about just the overall player as Kenyon Sadiq. And he's this guy where he his momentum in his draft stock feels like it comes in waves. Beginning of the year, oh yeah, Kenyon Sadiq, top 12 player in the class. And then you get to the middle portion of the season, he's a first rounder, he's a good tight end. And then you get to the later stage of the season, it's like, yeah, no, he's really good. He's really good. And then since the end of the college football playoff, and now we're into the offseason, it kind of feels like Kenyon Sadiq and all the hype has kind of gotten a little quiet. I think this is when we go to the next wave. This is the next peak for Kenyon Sadiq, and I think he's going to put up good numbers in the 40, the 10-yard split. If he does the bench press, I think he'll be fine there. And plus, you're going to see him move, and you're going to see his thighs and his quads. You're going to see, okay, 245, you normally say that, and you're like, oh, he's a Jonnu Smith type of tight end, things like that. But I think people are going to see him move in his lower mass, and they're going to be like, no, this guy's an inline blocking tight end. So, I think he's going to basically solidify he's tight end 1. And especially if we do, going back to some of the rumors we talked about with Kansas City, Travis Etienne, is that a thing? If that's the case and they do go tight end in free agency, all of a sudden, like Kenyon Sadiq at 9 looks like the move there for the Kansas City Chiefs. A couple of comments. Here we go. TJ got the facial hair and glasses going. So, yeah, exactly. Exactly. I'm going to go in with a alternate identity once we get to the combine. Max Klein. Yeah. Another really good athlete, 1-year starter this last year. at Michigan. He's definitely another name to know. Definitely keep your eyes on him. Really good inline blocker, and you look at how he moves as a route runner. Not a whole lot of production, but you just watch how he moves on the field, and it's an easy projection. Not saying he's Colston Loveland, but his blocking will make it easy for a team to draft him in, say, the 4th, 5th round, and then you're just kind of kicking the tires on like what else could he be. Kind of shades of Ben Sinnott. He's got more of a prototypical NFL build than Sinnott, but it's one of those things where like it's easy to draft this guy where we are because of X traits. And for Sinnott, he's been a pretty solid blocker at the next level. Klein's going to bring that to the table. He's going to make it easy to draft him in the 4th, 5th round because of his blocking ability. And then it's just kind of a wild card what you get from there. Michael Trigg, Justin Joly, love this comment. Trigg would definitely be someone to keep your eyes on. I would expect to see the athleticism scores be pretty good. He's not the world's greatest separator, so maybe it's the no 3 cones, but I would be willing to say he's basically a receiver. So he'll probably put up a pretty good time in the 40 and the 10-yard, and then big hands, wide catch radius. I think he'll kind of catch eyes there. He's also a guy who has a lot to gain from the interview portion, right? Plays at USC, plays at Ole Miss, and then lands at Baylor. And I've heard some of the character stuff or why he maybe bounced around a little bit there. So I think from the interview standpoint, Michael Trigg's got a lot to gain. Justin Joly, I think, is going to test well. The weight's definitely a big thing I'm looking at. He went to UConn, and he was 215 pounds. And then NC State this last year listed him at 250. Is he actually 250? I don't think he needs to be. If he's 245, I'm content with that. He's not the world's greatest blocker as is. He's kind of more of like an Evan Ingram type of tight end where it like looks the part. You don't love him playing in line, but looks the part. You could do it. But you're more so trying to play that guy at slot receiver, make him a red zone weapon. So I think Joly will test pretty well. Another one of these guys where like, I don't know if he'll do the 3 cone, maybe. But the 40 will be solid. I'd be curious to see if he benches as well. But the weight is kind of a big thing for Joly. Like, where do we actually land at there? Because 4 years ago you were a receiver weight, and then 250 feels a little big, and also your receiver production took a step back this year. So are you 242 because you think, hey, that's more where I was a year ago at NC State, and that's where I was more of a receiving threat? I'm very curious to see that. How can Stowers hurt his stock? I don't think he really can. I just didn't want to put him on here. He originally was my who should stand out. I do think Eli Stowers is going to have a great showing at the combine. I'm not really worried about his athleticism. But, Vanderbilt has him listed at 225. I would say he comes to the combine at 238, 242, somewhere in that 4-pound window. That being said, I still think he weighs less than Sadiq, and I think Sadiq will have just as impressive as athletic testing as Stowers. So that's ultimately why I was like, hey, it's a little lazy. Sadiq's definitely a standout. Stowers will be fantastic too, though. And his will be the 20-yard shuttle on top of the 40 and the 10-yard split. His agility and if he does a 3-cone, like that's what makes him stand out apart from a lot of the other tight ends here. A lot more steerability and his overall movement. But yeah, no, I think Stowers can be fine. I doubt he benches, but I think everything else will be really solid. Late round tight ends. Favorite draft and stash. Yeah, last year, actually a lot of those names you listed off right there. I have one dynasty league I started up last year, and I had Kraft as my main tight end. But I drafted Harold Fan to be my backup with taxis of Arondé Gatson and Gunnar Helm. So in that one dynasty league, I'm actually like overloaded at tight end. Good problem to have, though. But nevertheless, yeah, under the radar later tight ends here. Let me look at my rankings real quick. Yeah, Jack Andrews is definitely one that I want to talk about here in a second. Joe Royer from Cincinnati, really like his pass catching ability. Weight's another question for him. Can he play in line? Do you like the blocking there? I'm a little bit lower on Michael Trigg than most people, but Trigg is definitely an appealing pass catching option. He's basically just a receiver, though, so not much in the way of being a blocker. Tanner Koziel's interesting. 6'7", really nice red zone threat. Don't really see an insane like change of direction mover, but maybe the 40 and the 10-yard split are better than we're thinking. Or it may not even be the 10-yard split. It might be more the flying 20. He's 6'7", though, so he just moves a little bit differently than a lot of the other tight ends just because of the mass that he has. John Michael Gillenborg, like if there's ever a time to save his stock, this is it. He is a really good athlete, so he should absolutely test off the charts there. Terrence Carter from Texas Tech. Oregon transfer should be a really good tester, athletically speaking. And two other names to mention here. Daquan Wright from Ole Miss. He was always a guy that every time I watched Ole Miss, I'm like, God, look at that dude run after the catch. He was always that dude. So I think Daquan Wright will have a really solid showing from that standpoint. And then Oscar Delp. Oscar Delp, he's just a really explosive athlete. I just, why does Georgia not give him the ball? Like there must be something deeper there that I don't know. Because he's a solid pound for pound blocker. And when you watch him get out of his stance and explode vertically, the guy can get up the field. The guy can move. There's just not a whole lot of pass catching volume coming his way. So I don't know what the deal is with that, but Delp's another name to know. He'll put up great numbers. And then I also want to shout out here Sam Roush. I'm with you, Randy. Right now, I'd say he's my tight end 3. Like, I like Roush a ton, and part of it's the blocking. To me, he's like clear-cut the best blocking tight end in this class. So that it's easy to get him on the field. But to me, he's kind of Sam Laporta minus a top-end speed gear. Laporta was a really good athlete. Let me see if I can pull up his 40 time real quick. And I don't think that Roush will run nearly the 40. Let's see. Yeah, the 40-yard dash for Laporta was 90th percentile, 4.59. I wouldn't expect that from Sam Roush, but let me see if I can find, what did Tucker Kraft run in the 40? Kraft, 4.69, 70th percentile. I think that could be a lot closer. I'm a big Sam Roush guy. So, if Laporta ran 4.58, yeah, I think mid to low 4.6s would be a good spot for Sam Roush on top of awesome blocking ability. And he's a smooth route runner. Like, you watch him plant the foot, explode out of the break, or decelerate, come back to the football, or if he's doing something impromptu, off script, he moves fluidly in open space, works back to the quarterback. He does a lot of things well. Good hands, too. Looks pretty solid at the Senior Bowl. And that was kind of a confirmation there where it's like, he moves smooth when he's running these routes. He's just not pulling away from guys like a Sam Laporta would. So I really like him a lot. But getting back on track here, keep your eyes on Jack Andrews. Getting back to our combine testing here. So King Sadiq, top end time I had him at 21.6 miles per hour. You look at then Max Clare, top end speed of 19.3. We'll come back to Clare in just a moment. But I want to talk about Andrews. Top end speed at right about 20 miles an hour, 19.8. That's interesting. So he's a tick slower than Kenyon Sadiq. But he's a little faster than Max Clare, all while doing it at 6'4", 240. And Clare and Andrews are both listed at 6'4", 240. I can almost guarantee you both those guys, if they end up being the same height, same weight, I will do a $1,000 giveaway here on the channel. Clip it. If they both come into the same height, same weight, then I'm going to be amazed because they don't look that way on tape. And also, like, what are the odds they both weigh the exact same thing? But that being said, I'm curious to see the official height weights for both those guys. But Andrews at Cal specifically was such a fluid athlete, yards after the catch wise. And that was basically the focal point of that Mendoza Cal offense was like, holy shit, our offensive line sucks. Get the ball out to the tight ends. I think he'll be a guy who tests well 40-wise, 10-yard split, 20-yard shuttle, really nice agility and lateral movement. He's just a guy at Texas that, just didn't give him the football that much. So had he gone to a different school, maybe the production would have boosted him up the board. But I still think that Cal version of him is still there. And if anything, Texas asked him to do kind of like Claire, where it's like they asked him to be a little bit more NFL-like, be more pro-ready in that standpoint, where it's like, hey, you know what? Claire coming from Purdue to Ohio State, Andrews from Cal to Texas, you're no longer the focal point of the offense. The offense is no longer yours. So because of that, we need you to bulk up. We need you to play in line. We need you to do the dirty work. We're sorry, but we need it. Can you do it? And I think both of them check that box. But now it's going to be interesting to see, like, where is that weight for both of them? Does one of them try to go back to where they were the year before weight-wise to get a little bit more athletic, a little bit lighter, to run a little bit better? Or they keep that weight on to stay in line? I'm very curious to see that. But I do think Andrews is just a natural mover. Also, shout out to the PFF guys, Dalton and Max. They were talking about this in their tight end rankings. 99th percentile in-game athleticism score. They call it GAS, in-game athleticism score metric. And he's 99th percentile. So he's just one of these guys that moves really, really well on the field. And at this point, he's got the inline blocking chops. He's been used as a guy who can run the seams, a guy who can use yards after the catch. So diverse portfolio, and I think he's going to be a pretty solid tester. Not the best tester, not Stowers, not Sadiq, but I think we'll look back at check Andrews' numbers and be like, hey, those are really good numbers across the board. And I think the same will be true about Max Clare, last tight end we'll talk about here. He's got a lot to gain from, I feel like, the interviews. Hey, where are you comfortable at weight-wise? Do you want to be, like 2 years ago you were at Purdue and you were the focal point of the offense. Then you went to Ohio State and you were kind of the third fiddle. Where are you at in that? Where do you stay? Those kinds of things and those conversations will be interesting to have with a Max Clare. But ultimately, to me, I think where those conversations work in his favor now is if you look at Clare as a 2-year sample size. And again, the weight, maybe you try to get him back down a little bit closer to where he was at Purdue. But at this point, you've seen him be the focal point of an offense, a complementary piece of an offense, a receiving threat, and a really solid blocker. Not like world's greatest blocker, but like solid in doing his own. That, to me, creates a really interesting 2-year look at Max Clare. So I think ultimately, like, while it wasn't sexy this last year at Ohio State, he checked a lot of boxes for teams. And at the next level, I don't expect a team to draft him because they're like, hey, you're Brock Bowers. Get ready to be the offense, buddy. Like, he's going to go to an NFL team, probably 50 to 75 range, and be, if he goes to Denver, let's just say, you're still second fiddle to Cortland Sutton, and RJ Harvey's going to be a big part of that pass game. Or if he goes to, I'm trying to think about another team that needs a tight end. Doing this off the top can be tough sometimes. Let me see. Hold on. Let me just pull up a list of teams real quick. If he went to who else could use a tight end? In and around late second to early third. The Ravens are keeping Ingram, but let's just say it's the Baltimore Ravens. Somewhere in that range. To be the next Mark Andrews. I think he's done a lot of things to check those boxes to be like, yeah, I can be your next Mark Andrews because I can play in line. So, yeah, I think he's made himself a lot of money. And if he goes to the Ravens, he's behind the likes of Lamar being a threat in and of himself, Derrick Henry, and whoever else is in the backfield, Zay Flowers. So I don't know. He's going to be drafted to be a complimentary piece. So I think this last year Ohio State did more for him in the positive than it did in the negative, even though you look at the box score stats and it looks like a big step back. But yes, also want to welcome Casanova Court Club into the show. Appreciate you guys joining us. That's it for tight ends. Really appreciate that conversation. A couple other names again. So Sadiq, Claire, Andres. Also want to shout out, Sam Roush, I think could be a guy that does enough to check a lot of boxes here. Eli Stowers will be one of the names to know when it comes to the tight ends. And Michael Trigg will put up good numbers as well. And I think Jolie will check some boxes for teams as well. Now let's get into the offensive line. Who should stand out? Monroe Freeling. Freeling he's 6'7". I've heard he could be as tall as 6'9", but 6'7", 320, top end speed of 19.8 miles per hour or 18.8 miles per hour. That's ridiculous. And just for reference, Proctor top end speed 17.1 and Maxie Hanachor top end speed of 15.8. And I think part of that's probably just the gap scheme stuff for Hanachor. He could probably move a lot faster. But Monroe Freeling clearing away the best top end speed that we got out of the three guys on the screen right now. So 6'7", 320. And right now, you're not drafting him because he's a mover of people in the run game. You're drafting him because he's a high-level pass protector and he's light on his feet and he moves well. And you're hoping to then, tack on a little bit more muscle so that way when he is moving in space, he's connecting on these blocks, sustaining these blocks, and really driving through defenders. So work in progress body-wise, but for what he has athletically right now, he's absolutely a guy who's gonna steal the show. 20-yard shuttle, 40-yard dash is going to be good too. So this guy is going to be an absolute. He's going to steal the show from a movement standpoint. And if he's 320, that's going to look even better. And from an RES standpoint, 6'7", 320, the 40, the 20-yard, he's going to light up the show from that point. And then we get Keaton Proctor. Also did want to note a lot of these guys that we've talked about are Feldman Freaks list guys. Damone Claiborne, player number 63. I'm not doing a great job mentioning this as we went along. Damone Claiborne, number 63 on Bruce Feldman Freak list. Brendan Thompson was number 91. Kenyon Sadiq was number 11 on the Bruce Feldman Freak list. And then number 2 on that list was Keaton Proctor. And I don't love the tape on Proctor as much as some other people. I think the arm length measurement is definitely something I'm keeping my eyes on here at the combine. That's going to be a conversation with a lot of guys. But I do think the arm length sometimes is prohibitive. And then the weight is interesting, right? He moves well for 367, but do you have to play at 367? And if he got down to 350, he'd move even better. And we'd be saying, oh my God, 350 moves like that? We'd still be saying all the crazy stuff we say about Keaton Proctor. But and specifically, I think his movement skills works more in open space moving forward, right? As a run blocker, he looks more fluid and put together and coordinated as a mover of space. But when you watch him in pass pro, I don't think the footwork's fully there. The hand placement can miss high and wide, and he just looks a little bit more clunky working backwards. And I don't know what that is. I don't know if it's coaching, if it's just a comfort thing, what it might be. But that being said, the 20-yard shuttle, the on-field drills where you see for the offensive lineman, he's going to look like a behemoth carrying that weight really well. So he's going to be a winner from that standpoint. Also has a lot to gain by just proving to teams or having conversations with teams that I can play tackle, right? If his arm length is 33 and 1/8, that's a huge win for him because for some teams, you make the threshold. And if he's 32 and 7/8, no matter how much, maybe we can smudge it a little bit. There's going to be teams that, sub 33. Yep, you're out. So the arm length's going to be a point where he makes or loses a lot of money for sure. But he's going to be one of these guys that moves really well when it comes to the on-field drills and whatnot. Does he bench? I'm curious that. Not that necessarily correlates, but he's a guy that I think, I wish there was a little bit more pop in his hands. And he's also a guy that sometimes people get into his chest and it's ooh, you're 367, pal. Now, again, a lot of that's more of his anchor and his lower half strength. So the bench isn't really a measurement for that, but I am just kind of curious overall play strength, grip strength, things like that. But he should be a winner. But I've just been a little bit lower on Keaton Proctor, but this should be the week where he kind of rebounds his stock a good bit for people like me. But the arm length is the number one thing. I kind of see him as a guard. I truly do think. The other thing with that is his outside shoulder. He's a behemoth of a offensive lineman, and at college, guys are just reluctant to try to go around his outside shoulder and turn the arc because he is so big. The next level, that might be a different story. And I do think that outside shoulder is prone to be exploited. So I do wonder if, again, guard is ultimately the best place for him. But considering I worry about his power and guys getting into his chest, I don't really love the idea of a D tackle getting into his chest and lining him up there. But keep your eyes on Maxi Hanachor. This is a guy that really should test well. The top end speed was actually a little surprising for me at 15.76 miles per hour, but 6'5", 322, looks like a really coordinated and put together athlete at the Senior Bowl. And, he's soccer background, only been playing football, really full-time and in games for 3 years now. So his pathway to the field has been impressive. And I put him in the keep your eyes to watch category because he should be a guy who comes away with good numbers, good testing. It should be considered a winner. And when you tack that on top of what he did at the Senior Bowl, all this is really mounting in the right direction to get Maxi Hanachor as this guy who I think 2 months ago, you talk to most people, he's probably mid-second round guy. If that, maybe a little bit lower if you haven't watched his tape yet. But all of a sudden now he's catching late first round hype. One of the box, I think was it Daniel Jeremiah's? I think it was Daniel Jeremiah's where he went 23 to the Eagles, right? Like that's as high as I've seen him go. So now we're starting to get to this point where like, all right, Hanachor feels like he's probably going to go round 1. If he doesn't, he'll go somewhere in the top 40, no later than top 50. So the combine should be another feather in his cap. Let's get into some of these live comments. Proctor's the one guy I could see at the combine that, yeah. And I could see it going either way, right? Like if he does come in with, and I've heard the arms can be as short as 32 and a quarter. And like at that point, yeah, he's a guard. Like there's not gonna be any team that tries to make that. But do you want a 6'7", 367 pound guard? Like that's gonna be a question mark for some teams. Who's my overall top offensive lineman? It's CeCe Moinoa and then probably Vega Ioane. I like CeCe. The question for CeCe is just kind of different players really and different scheme fits, but it's the Peter Skoronski thing from a few years ago. Where I thought Skoronski could be a good tackle. You're probably talking stack him up, and he's probably tackle 8, left tackle that is. I'm talking about either side. Left tackle 8 through 14. And dude, and especially as a Steelers fan, like I think about that, and I'm like, dude, we haven't had a left tackle that would rank in that high since like Alejandro Villanueva. So yeah, sign me up for that. But in theory, if you got into him in a zone blocking scheme, he could be a top 3 guard. So that was kind of where it is. And I think the same thing for Moinoa, probably just a little bit more of the gap scheme versus the zone. But I think you give him the shot to fail a tackle at this point, especially if you're the Cardinals and you take him at 3. Quentin Nelson went 6, I believe, and he was a guard. But that's really kind of an exception to the rule. And really part of the reason Nelson goes that high, and I think this could be true for Moinoa, but the floor is so high that you didn't mind spending that capital on a guard that high just because like the hit rate was, you felt like pretty close to 100% on Quentin Nelson. So Moinoa, I think if you draft him at 3, you're willing to bite the bullet if he's more of a good tackle versus a great guard, if you're going to take him at 3. And also if you're the Cardinals, like anything to get Jonah Williams off the field, or if you can kick him inside a guard, that would be the ultimate win. But yeah, Moinoa, and then I'd probably go Vega Ioane. I have to double check my big board though. If he waves in a little light, moves well, could still probably go round 1. Waves in at 360, yeah, I totally agree. And really I go back to like Anthony Belton last year, where he was at NC State, and I heard he was up to like 380. And then he showed up to the Senior Bowl, and he was 349. And he looked so much lighter on his feet. Now, Green Bay still moved him inside to guard, and I think the foot speed was probably the pathway to that decision. But nevertheless, he like gave himself a shot at being a tackle. And also, let's not forget, he went from someone that like I didn't think had a shot going top 100, cuts down weights, has a good week at the Senior Bowl, and he's the 56th overall pick by the Green Bay Packers. So like there's that too. So yeah, no, and to me, like, and Trevor Sikkema said the same thing on NFL Stock Exchange. Really, I don't see an advantage of coming in, if you're an offensive lineman, anything above 340. Like, even if you're a gap scheme guy, 340 is plenty big. Like, 340 is huge. You don't really see a whole lot of even gap scheme guards bigger than that. Right, sure, you get your Trent Browns of the world who, like, that dude at this point in his career is 370 or whatever. So, like, sure, but, like, we're talking end of the career Trent Brown. So, I really do hope Proctor comes out to Indy and he's 345, 350. Because then I do think he'll test and he'll move really, really, really well. And then, yeah, that whole offensive line from Alabama, yeah. And I've talked to you about this, Randy. I have never seen an Alabama team struggle to establish the run. And I've been alive for 28 years now. And, like, I know that's not the world's biggest sample size to pull from college football, but that's weird. But, like, all of a sudden this year, they just – and you know what a big reason why is Jaden Roberts. When that team has Jaden Roberts leading the way, they actually move the ball. Like, because it's Jaden Roberts right next to Caden Proctor, and they just run left side, and those two behemoths, they move dudes. But, dude, Jaden Roberts here, let me just go pull up his actual snap totals here. I don't think he had a single game over 20 snaps played. Jaden Roberts, Alabama. Let's see. The most amount of snaps he had in a single game this year was 24 against LSU. Pass blocking grade of 90. What do you know? Like, guy just didn't play enough. Or actually, sorry, that was run blocking. So he had a couple of games where he got up over 60. South Carolina, LSU. 2 games where he played over 60 snaps. But here's how it is. Louisiana Monroe, 14 snaps. Wisconsin the next week, 29. Nothing week 4. At Georgia, 7 snaps. At Missouri, 41. 41 against Tennessee. It's okay, not too bad. That's mostly a game. 69 against South Carolina, nice. 64 against LSU. 43 against Eastern Illinois. 5 against Oklahoma. And then their bowl game against Indiana, and he plays 14 snaps. When they had Jaden Roberts out there, they could run the ball. But when they didn't, yeah, it just left a lot to be desired. Monroe Freeling, that sounds like the name that should be. Yes, 100%. 100%. Sounds like, Secretary of the Treasury. I'm trying to think. I was a history minor. I'm trying to think if that was actually I think Secretary of the Treasury was the official title then. They've gone through different name changes. But yeah, honestly, that would be kind of a fun little side video to do. Like, just a little fun, names of history, like who sounds like they should be what, and just kind of make some fun with the draft class. Yeah, and Damone Watson, 450 pounds. Yeah, that was last year's class, right? Like the guy that's supposed to be the plug for the tush push. Yeah, wow. Played for the Bucks in their practice squad, I think, for a little bit. But yeah, interesting. But yeah, no, great conversation there. Yeah, I definitely am with y'all that Caden Proctor, this could kind of go one way or another for him. All right, one more position group to talk about in today's live, and that is interior offensive line. This one's pretty simple to me. For Trey Zune, I was actually interested in his arm length measurement at the Senior Bowl, 32 7/8. So, I do wonder if there's a team that's like, yeah, it's close enough. We can squint and call that 33. So, I wonder if he ends up getting tackle opportunities at the next level. And I was kind of surprised at the Senior Bowl that a majority of his reps were at tackle. And frankly, his better reps were at tackle. So, he may not even be interior offensive line. But I've been kind of thinking, throughout this process, I kind of thought he was a guard, but then I went back and he's played over 100 snaps at center, and I think that's honestly just the easier projection. So I put him in here with the centers or interior offensive line because I do think the next level, he'd be a kick-ass center. He's just such a clean mover in space. He carries his weight really, really well. 309 pounds at the Senior Bowl. He just moves really well in space. And that arm length's actually pretty decent. So again, might be a tackle, but I think this guy's a guard. Really smooth mover. His eyes are also fantastic too. And that might be the thing that most makes me interested about him as a center in like a zone scheme. His ability to see the field, climb to the next level, locate, and then, link onto a defender, get their hands. And there's also his hands placement's really, really solid too. So I think, get this guy to like San Francisco, let him be the center of the future. He could absolutely feast. Then Connor Lew has a lot to gain just because he's coming off that ACL injury. But I think when you look at his 2 years of tape, a full season of last year and then 4 or 5 games this year, even if this year was a little bit of a step back in pass protection, it's still the best 2-year sample size of any center in this class. So he's probably not a first rounder. You're not the Lions taking him at 17, where maybe we would have thought of that 9 months ago, 10 months ago. But that being said, like I've mocked him to the Lions in the second round, the Vikings in the second round, the Jaguars in the second round can make some sense. Or if he's there in the third round, I think a team should absolutely take a shot in the dark on him. Because again, he's the best center in this class over a 2-year sample size. And we're seeing guys come off the ACL injuries, better than ever. So I'm not really too worried about the long-term ramifications of an ACL injury to a center like Lew. And I don't even know if he's doing any on-field testing. Again, it's almost impossible to find out, especially a couple days before the actual drills start, who's doing what, who's not doing what. Because sometimes you'll hear from a guy and it's like, yeah, I'm doing everything. And then 2 days later, it's like, yeah, I'm just going to run the 40. Like I think Janae Barron was one of those guys where I was like, oh, dude, this guy's going to crush everything. And then he just ran the 40. It was a 4.4, and he was like, I'm good. Like that was all I needed to do. And I was like, all right, kudos. Hats off. So hard to tell if Connor Lew's even 100% healthy to do this, but I think the interviews and the medicals in and of themselves bring a lot to the table for Connor Lew. And then Brian Parker II. The Shrine Bowl and getting access to that tape of those practices was huge because this whole time I've been projecting Brian Parker, this right tackle from Duke, as a center. But that being said, at getting the ability to see him at Shrine actually play center made the evaluation, the judgment to that decision so much easier because then I actually got to see it. And he looked pretty good. He looks good. You can definitely tell he's a little raw, right? Like, especially when it comes to hitting landmarks, when they're doing like the run blocking drills and you're trying to get them into a specific position, hit this spot, or like, hey, this double team, it's like there's a little bit of like a learning curve there. But considering he had 3 practices to pick it up, like I'm not too concerned about it. It sounds like something that a guy smart enough to get into Duke can figure it out. So, and he should be a really good tester. Top end speeds for all 3 of these guys. Trey Zune, 14.6 miles per hour, mostly at left tackle. Connor Lew, 14.7. I would like to see that a little bit higher. But then that brings us to Brian Parker, 15.4 miles per hour. So again, the San Francisco 49ers, depending on what happens, if the Chargers are going to fully embrace Mike McDaniel and their wide zone, kind of Shanahan tree, great scheme fit there for another team that needs a center and who can get out on the move. And another guy with maybe not quite the eyes as Trey Zune. Like, if I remember right, Trey Zune calls out the protections, kind of like Will Campbell did last year for LSU. Not often you see a left tackle do that, but I think that's another reason where like Zune as a center would be badass. But Parker, like, he doesn't do that, but his eyes still take him to the right place, and that's doing it at offensive tackle. So I'm really excited to see more of what the athletic testing kind of matching him up against some of the best centers we've seen. Not even like best of, like where his athletic testing is compared to Cam Jurgens, who, you know, second round guy who was an excellent fit for a zone blocking team. Tyler Linderbaum or Jackson Powers Johnson. I'm just curious to see like where he fits in athletically as a barometer to a lot of those other guys. But guys, that does it. That is my offensive scouting combine preview for today. And then tomorrow we're going to do the defensive side of the ball. So let me know. Well, I'll hang out here just for a little bit longer. See if you guys have any questions. Who stands out? I'll go ahead and showcase all the screens one more time. If you want to shout out to anybody that I didn't talk about or want to hear me talk about someone that we didn't mention, definitely go ahead and fire them into the live chat. We are also, don't want to show that one too quick. Also did want to try to plug away if anybody's sending a super chat, definitely want to make sure that we address those. And then also while you guys are sending stuff in, let me go double check our X post and see if anybody had shouted out names of players they wanted to have discussed. So here, let me bounce over to our Twitter. Sorry, everyone. Just give me one moment. Yep, nothing there. That's totally fine. Again, today's the first day of going live, so I don't expect a whole lot of the super chats and the random one-offs and whatnot. So if that's it, if that's what everyone wants to talk about, we can leave it there. Sounds good. Works for me. Just to reiterate one more time, we're going to be going live again tomorrow. Defensive preview for the NFL Scouting Combine. Then Wednesday, I'm thinking about doing a live 2-round mock draft. And then Thursday through Sunday, we're talking combine winners with each and every day's position groups of measurements, 40s, the shuttles, all that stuff, plus the little bit of buzz that I'm maybe hearing from some of the boots on the ground that I do know in Indianapolis. I'll definitely share any and all of the feedback and the kind of hot gossip, if you will, that I'm hearing there. Elijah Surratt, I don't foresee Surratt having a great combine per se. I just don't think he's got great long speed, and frankly, I could see a world where he just waits to run the 40 at Indiana's pro day. But to me, that's not really why you're drafting Elijah Surratt. I'm drafting him in the third round because I want an X receiver who has great late hands, who makes those back shoulder grabs, who can run slants, make contested grabs over the middle of the field. So, like my last mock, I had him go, lazy, but had him go third round to the Raiders, pair him up with Fernando Mendoza, built-in chemistry. Let's go. That's what would excite me. Nothing he does at Indy really would move the needle for me one way or another. So I can see a world where he does pretty limited athletic testing. And then everything I've heard about the guy that is Elijah Surratt, JMU transfer, follows Signetti to Indiana. I just hear he's a absolute high caliber dude. The other Indiana receiver, though, I will talk about him, Omar Cooper Jr., he definitely could have been somewhere on this list. Omar Cooper Jr. easily could be one of the winners. Super explosive in and out of his breaks. And I think the 40 will be good enough, 4.4. 4.44 would probably be where I peg his 40. So I think adequate 40 time. And I think everything else is going to look really, really good that he decides to participate in. Another guy with a gauntlet drill might look awesome for Omar Cooper Jr. So a couple of names worth mentioning there, no doubt about it. Any other thoughts? Any other comments? Questions? I'll wait. This was fun. This was a good time. I appreciate everyone who spent some time hanging out with us. Also, let me know, give me some feedback on best time. Today I did 1:30 just because that's when I was available. Frankly, got back from the gym and finished on all these graphics. 1:30 was a good time. But if there's earlier, if it's later, let me know. Let me hear some thoughts on best time to do some of these live streams. But it seems like that's pretty much it for today. And I won't twist y'all's arm any more than that. So once again, here are quarterbacks who I think should stand out, have a lot to gain, and you should keep your eyes on. Here are the running backs, wide receivers, and we talked about Malachi Fields. We talked about a bunch of other guys who aren't mentioned here. Bryce Lance, Indiana guys just a moment ago. Tight ends, we also mentioned Justin Jolie. We also mentioned Michael Trigg. Some other guys definitely keep your eyes on who could be really good testers. Oscar Delp, throw him into that mix as well. Offensive tackles, this one was a little bit more chalk. I think Caleb Lomu should do pretty well here, especially with how he moves in open space. Spencer Fano, same thing. Blake Miller should be a really good tester from an athletic standpoint as well. And then interior line. And these were the main three. These are the three guys I'm excited about. Lou, I think, just has a lot to gain from the interviews and the medicals. And then Zuna, I think, is going to test really well, movement-wise. And then, frankly, with his arm length, the Senior Bowl might not even be interior offensive line. But I'm still calling him a center. It's also a center class that needs any and all reinforcements. Absolutely possible. But, guys, with all that said, I want to say thank you for spending some time and hanging out with us here on Beyond the Tape here with our offensive side of the ball, NFL scouting preview. Thank you again for joining us. Be sure to come back tomorrow. Tomorrow, we're going to do the defensive side of the ball, so a lot more names to talk about. And then Wednesday, we're going to be doing a live 2-round mock draft. So if you want to hear your voice heard, you want to see your picks made in my mock drafts, Wednesday's the time to come join the show. So I want to say thank you again. Hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day. And until next time, my name is Teach, and we are signing off.